Okay, welcome to Media Over QUIC. If you're not here for Media Over QUIC, you have lucked out because this is way better than the working group you were trying to find. We're here, of course, in Vancouver, BC, and continuing our little local sports mascot series. The hockey is, of course, kind of the national pastime of Canada, and the local hockey team here is the Vancouver Canucks. Canuck is a slang term for Canadian, and their mascot is Finn the whale. It's an orca whale, which is a species that is native to the waters around Vancouver. And we remind you, the session is being recorded. This is the note well. It says that any ideas you ever come up with related to the internet are the property of the IETF. And if you believe that, you should probably read the note well. We've also been asked to note really well that we should treat each other with respect. Please address each other as you might if you're going out to dinner, not as if you were on Twitter. Also, harassment is sometimes a problem at the IETF. If you are being harassed or if you witness harassment, feel free. There's an ombuds team that's here to address your anonymous concerns. And of course, there are also nominal authority figures here, us, the chairs, and our area director, Zahed. Raise your hand, please, Zahed. Can certainly take any of your concerns about any sort of harassment that you experience or witness. Okay, meeting tips. Again, this is being recorded. This is a good opportunity for you to scan that QR code that is on the screen and be admitted to automatically sign the blue sheet so we know you're here, and also participate in any online polls that we conduct and enter the queue. Also a very important thing. Please, if you're using the full client, turn off your audio and video. This is the agenda. If you saw it more than like 15 minutes ago, it's changed. We've done a lot of shuffling between part one and part two, or session one and session two of this meeting. This is what we're planning to do today. It's a packed schedule, and we're going to move briskly. This is what we're going to do tomorrow. I'm going to go back to the other slide and give anyone an opportunity to bash the agenda if they would like. We've been bashing all day. It's not too late to bash some more. Alan and I did make a conscious decision a few days ago to focus on sort of higher level discussions. As many of you know, we have virtual interims on very frequently between meetings that address a lot of low level, draft issues and GitHub things. We will do some of that this week, but that is not the emphasis of these meetings. Okay, hearing no bashes, I'll move on. We need a scribe. Who wants chocolate? Watch that things fall off the edge of that agenda as we sit here and stare uncomfortably at each other.
And as a reminder, we do have a transcript and a video, so you do not need to record the play-by-play, mostly just recording major decisions or outcomes. We can also get you a backup note taker to help. This is the only working group that offers chocolate as a reward, so if you're going to get tapped for one, at least get paid for it. All right, Watson, thank you.
Can we have a backup here in the room? Can somebody back up Watson in the room?
Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. All right, so you can work out who gets the chocolate there. You can deliver it to Watson. All right, that was also be painless. All right, so now we're going to take a moment to talk about the interop that happened this week. Oops.
You want to talk through it?
No, you do it.
Yeah, that's what I said, me. You put me on the right slide. All right, so we have the draft 5 was published right at the draft deadline. So our various implementations were hard at work implementing draft 5. Right now, at my count, we have 8 different implementations, including a couple of new ones. They were not participating in the interop just yet, but welcome to new people who are implementing. I think it's a very healthy ecosystem, and most everybody is up on draft 4 or draft 5. If you flip to the next slide. I tried to throw together a quick matrix where people are achieving interop. This is not as organized as it has been in the past, but you can see that there's definitely some amount of draft 5 interop and draft 4 interop happening across the ecosystem. It's the next slide. But I'd like to put out a call to see if anybody's interested in becoming a new sort of MOQ interop czar, where the goal would be to try to get the people who have various sample apps to document their behaviors in drafts. MOQ chat does have a draft, but for example, there are 3 different clock or date sample applications that are all different. So getting some of that behavior documented would be helpful. Defining interop use cases. So what various parts of the standard do we want to demonstrate interop on, not just basic publish and subscribe, but some of the far-flung reaches of the spec that maybe aren't seeing as much love. Maintaining that spreadsheet or matrix instead of me having to throw it together hastily at the last minute, and then you talking here at these meetings instead of me. So we could really use some help. So think about it. It's a great way you can help if you're looking to contribute to MOQ more and looking for a place to jump in, especially if you like interop. And we can offer chocolate.
For the scribe's benefit, Watson, he was talking about the MOQ chat, MOQ chat draft. That's the one he was referring to. Just out of curiosity, do we have someone who's instantly willing to volunteer to be interop czar? Okay. Our ancillary request is, even in the absence of a czar, if you have an interop application, if you could like write a draft. I don't think we have any intent to make that go to RC or anything, but just writing down in some fashion how the thing works and like how catalogs are and what the track name conventions are, et cetera, would really make interop work a lot better, because it's hard for us to get these implementations talk to each other without those. Okay, so next, as you may have noticed on the Zulip, we are actually live streaming this via MOQ. So I think Jordy is going to say a few words about that. Yes.
Yep. So as Martin mentioned, so we are live streaming this event using MOQ. It's as far as I know, the first public live stream in MOQ. So quite exciting. It was working 30 seconds ago when I was sitting there. So I hope it's still up and working. So we are planning to stream this session and the next session on Thursday. Lower your expectations. It's an alpha stage, and if you're trying here in this Wi-Fi, yeah, you're probably not getting the best experience. And please provide feedback. It's just an experiment. Then we want to get feedback and make it better. Next slide, please. So if you're curious about the setup, this is the hardware setup. So it's just a webcam, USB-C connected to my laptop. We are getting the audio from the audio and video crew. It's just the mix of the whole meeting. It's also captured in my laptop, and it's running. Then my laptop is wired to an IETF. So because if we're trying to stream with Wi-Fi, with this Wi-Fi, it's not going to work at all. So it's wired to IETF network. IETF network is connected, as far as I know, with 2 gigabit links to internet. Thanks to Akamai, that we are running a MOQ relay in Los Angeles. There is another node in Madrid, but this is the one to serve the web pages. So the important path here is the blue one. There's the MOQ path. So the relay is in Los Angeles, and then if you connect to it, you will be connecting to that relay in Los Angeles. So next slide. So this is hardware. So this is software. We are running MOQ encoder player. That it's an open source implementation from Meta. You can find it in GitHub, in Facebook Experimental, or Meta Experimental, I think it's called now. And the relay, it's Moxygen. It's also a Meta relay open source by Meta. And then the player is the same code as encoder player. So next slide. More interesting details for the MOQ fans here. So the encoder is just a JavaScript browser app that uses web codecs to manage media inside the browser, and web transport API that implements the MOQ implementation. The stream that we are producing, it's a single stream, no AVR, 854 by 480 30 frames per second, encoded in H.264 750 kilobits. And audio, it's Opus. We are using LOC container, not exactly the draft, is a bit modified, but hopefully we will be able to just put some changes in the draft or clarify the draft, and then that will be the pure LOC. And it's working on draft 04. And that's the encoder UI if you're curious. Next slide. So the relay, as I said, Moxygen, C++, it's based on meta production, battle-tested production, open source also libraries like Proxygen, MoveFast, Wongle, Fizz, and Foley, Draft 04 obviously, and no priorities implemented yet. This is important. So if there is a network issue, you will see video and audio failing. Theoretically, when priority is implemented, you will be under network constraints, you will see video failing, but not audio. So next slide. And this is what you will see if you open the link that it's in the chat. So you will see a player. It's a JavaScript, web codecs also, web transport. You will have you can see at the lower right. You can have different options to select for latency. You can play with them and see how it performs in different latencies. This latency is basically the jitter buffer, sorry. And that's it. So next slide. This is the link. It's also in the MOQ chat in Zulip. So this is a QR code if you want. And let me just thank the IETF, the NOC, and Miteco and Encore, the AV crew, that help us to set it all up. So thank you.
Thank you, Jordi. Any questions? Okay. So we're delivering media over quick. I guess we're done.
Yep.
Good night, everybody.
Going to last call and.
All righty. So next, our area director also gently suggested that we should provide a sort of check-in on their overall status and the big picture of MOQ and our progress. And so Alan is now going to deliver that.
Yeah, so thanks everyone. I'm just it's kind of a level up, just reminding everybody like where the progress we've made so far, where we are right now, and kind of a rough sketch maybe of where we're going to be spending our time, maybe the rest of the year. And it's obviously an open discussion. Next slide. So where'd we come from? MOQT. I know we've been working at this a long time, but draft 00 is only 1 year old. So we've only published and adopted that draft 1 year ago. And since then, we've made a lot of big improvements. We've gone through 2 iterations of how we're going to do subscribe parameters. I think we're going to have another discussion today for what the 3rd version will look like. But we spent a lot of time working on what the object model is and how that interacts with transport. Object status. I want to say that we had a very successful interim in June, where we came up with the priorities, maybe call it V1 priorities, but people seem to be pretty happy with the outcome there, I think, and so I'm excited about that. And then there's been many, many mechanical and editorial improvements to the draft in a year. So there's been a lot of progress, even though sometimes we know that we like to argue with each other and it's kind of slow. Looking back, I'm still very proud of what we got done. So next slide. And then we think about the other higher level things this group is doing. Like we've achieved consensus on how we're splitting up the transport, the catalog, container, and streaming formats, and agreed on the sort of layering. We've adopted the catalog draft, and we have these active IDs out there for both LOC and WARP. Next slide. So where we are right now, we're getting a lot of feedback from people who are trying to implement the draft and doing this interop testing, and that's resulting in a pretty high volume of issues coming through, which is good. People are using it and finding the problems, and that's why the IETF works on running code. So just the last 90 days, we got about the same number of issues coming in as going out, and given that we have a high number open, we think that there are a lot of issues out there where there's been enough progress where we could get a PR and get consensus, and we might need, there's already about 8 or 10 that are marked needs PR. There's probably another set that could be. So can I maybe get a show of hands, people who are like, would not mind being assigned to write a PR by an editor? Is that something people are interested in? 1 person is gonna help us, 2, 3, okay, 4. All right, sort of I was maybe hoping for a more enthusiastic, what's that? get the names. I saw Cullen and Mo and Suhas and Coda. And did I see a hand over here? Christian. So maybe there's some virtual hands too. So I appreciate that. And hopefully that, I think if we can nail down a few more corners of the tent, it'll be a little bit easier to make progress on some of the bigger things that are still outstanding. So we'll work with the editor to assign out PRs to write, and then we'll use the weekly interim time to review those and hopefully make some progress.
Mike English has raised his hand virtually.
All right.
That's
Thanks,
all I
Mike.
was going to say.
All right. Thank you. Next slide. So where are we going? So we've been spending a fair bit of time in the last couple of months talking about the partial reliability model, things like cache duration and delivery timeouts. I think we're getting close there. There's PRs up. I don't know that we're going to spend that much time resolving it here or not, but hopefully soon we can land that. We've talked about also that we need to talk about the semantics of stream reset, which kind of also fits in this partial reliability aspect. So I think that's something that's probably more a shorter term thing we'll pick up. Earlier this year, we started this discussion about fetch versus subscribe, and we didn't quite reach resolution on it. I think there was kind of an intentional choice to go after partial reliability and priorities first and then circle back, because hopefully it would make it easier to see what we need. And there's other subscription related issues that we've hit, like subscribe done is a big problem, deduplication of tracks, how we're going to resolve track alias and subscribe ID. So it seems like maybe from our perspective, one of the bigger rocks that we're gonna look at soon. And then other sort of big issues that we think will probably consume our time going forward, and this is where they certainly welcome working group feedback. So publisher related issues, things like make before break, or how you discover multiple publishers like we've discovered through MOQ chat or other meeting type applications. We know there's a lot in the security and DDoS space. We see things in the issues about flow control, about limits, that kind of thing. And authentication is another area where we have not spent much time. So those seem like some things. I don't know if anybody wants to jump up and mention something else they'd really like us to see add to this like near-term rest of 2024 roadmap, like, or send feedback through the list also. But let me jump in. And Colin, go ahead.
Look, this is hard to say whether this is a small thing or a big thing, but that look ahead parsing issue that, I think that's a very valid issue. I don't know if it's small or big, but I wish that one got dealt with. It was the issue that Christian raised on look ahead parsing.
Yeah.
I would like to see that solved sooner rather than later, because I think it'll be harder to solve later.
I think that's good. I think that's one of those issues where it maybe is ready for someone to write a PR, and maybe we can deal with it. But like this class of, yes.
Yeah, fair enough. I
feedback
forgot to say my name, Colin Jennings, but whatever.
Yeah, no, I know which one you're talking about. Anybody else want to comment on MOQT things they want this group to tackle shortly? Okay, next slide. So, and then higher levels, I know Will's going to talk later today about some of these things, but just catalog seems like we've adopted it. It seems like it's in a pretty good place. There's issues being addressed there, but the next step there's probably some kind of basic interop. I don't know when would be a good time people are interested in working on that, because I know MOQT takes up a lot of the oxygen, but that's probably the next step there. LOC is out there. We just heard from Jordy that it's like part of the demo that we're using, so it's important work for this group. So we maybe should be thinking about the path to adoption, and but it sounds like maybe it needs some updates. Warp is our highest level thing. We're looking forward to the update today, but it still feels a little bit further away in terms of how much time we have and what people are going to be able to focus on. But again, curious if people see things differently along these lines. Okay. All right. I think that's all I have. Thanks, everyone. Oh, our esteemed AD.
Jahid, thanks, Alan, for doing this. I actually requested you yesterday, so you delivered it. And I loved it. So I think this is a nice way of like getting this working group to get in like a course of like what we are doing right now, what we have done, and where we are going. And I actually my intention was to actually get us all agree on this. This is how we are working. I see like there's not much like dispute about that one, like how you deliberated that one. So I think this is really good. Thanks for doing it anyway.
Next up, we have Ian, who's going to give a very brief rundown of what has changed in our most active draft since our last meeting.
All right, next slide. So 2 updates, 04 and 05 were done between the 2 drafts. And so we did subscribe V2, which makes the old subscribe, which people complained was horrendously complex, into something slightly simpler, but still meets the core use cases, such as starting at head and such. We also added subscribe update, so that allows you to update now, say the priority, but originally kind of the range of objects that you're requesting in a given subscribe. So next slide. So the big one here is the priority and group send order 470, which I'm going to go over in just a sec in a little more detail. We also did some terminology updates. Thank you very much, Alan. Specified some errors and added object status. So object status is an interesting one because that allows us to specify when an object or group is missing explicitly, instead of it just having it be a gap and you don't know why it's there. So this says it's missing, you're not going to get it, essentially. We also added a track status and a track status request. It's sort of like a head request in some sense. It tells you what the most recent object ID that's been published is. So next slide. So yes, the priority and group order. The subscribe now has a priority field between 0 and 255. The subscribe also has a group order field, which can either be ascending, descending, or default. So default indicates that the publisher kind of gets to choose. Subscribe OK specifies the publisher's preferred group order, again, which is used if the subscribe specifies default. And the object headers had a priority field before. Now we have a well-defined use of that field. And so the framing does not change, but we actually have text about like what to do with it and how to treat it. And as a general rule, the subscriber's preferences are considered as being more important than the publisher's. And under the theory that it knows what its viewport is and such, but if a subscriber wants to defer to the publisher's preferences, then it basically sets everything to the same priority and the group order to default and kind of lets the publisher do what it wants. Next slide.
I just wanted to, since I fell into the trap of the priority field did not change in 05, it actually did. It's no longer a varant. It is now a byte. So yeah, that was an interrupt bug that I had. So it did change ever so slightly. And thank you for Victor for sending a priority of bigger than 62.
Thank you, Ellen. Okay, next slide. Okay. So this is a kind of a short summary of text that we wrote up during actually the interim on day 2. Colin in particular was working hard on this, so we wrangled this quite a bit. But approximately what happens is for all subscriptions with data to send, you first select a subscription, first byte subscriber priority. If they're equal, then look at the publisher priority. If both of them are equal, then the implementation kind of chooses which one to send. So we didn't specify exact round robin or anything like that. There are a number of other reasons why you might choose what to send, but that's how you select which subscription to send on. Within the selected track/subscription, you select the group. If it's ascending, you pick the lowest group ID. If it's descending, you pick the highest group ID. And then within the selected group, you always send in increasing object ID order. So you select the smallest object ID. And that's a quick summary of how kind of priority and the group send order feature that were added in that PR work. And thank you to everyone who worked very hard to hash out an awful lot of details and think through an awful lot of edge cases. So I mean, at least so far, I'm quite happy with how that sorted itself out. Jiangxi?
Can you, CMCC, actually ask similar questions with Alan Monday MOPS meeting. I read through the draft, and then for the object definition, it has payload and metadata here. And then I read through the metadata field, got like group ID, object, track, all kind of the good fields. I just wondering why in the draft it does not define some extension field, like in the metadata field, if you define some extension, that is just leave a way later for like a VSA for whatever to extend, not going to affect the MOQT itself, but just leave some field as extension. Just say, okay, this is like the field length, and then some bunch of, okay, whatever you want to define. So has a group ever thought about it?
Are you talking about extensibility for things like object headers in particular? Yes.
Yeah, the metadata in the object header.
Yep,
yeah.
there's actually an open issue, I believe, for, I mean, I think the straw man proposal is to put the properties sort of chunk of data like we have in the handshake setup and the subscribe, and put those into object. I don't think we've had a use case that's so compelling that it's been worth doing yet, but you know, I can certainly imagine it coming along, and you know, in my mind, a compelling use case would make that more compelling. I don't know.
Maybe after meeting, I can give you a very good use case that's being discussed right now in the 5G domain right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks.
I put the issue in the chat if you're curious.
Thank you, Alan. That's all I have. Those are my 5 minutes.
Cullen and
Sorry. Nope, that's not all I have.
Ooh, just electrocuted this thing. Colin Jennings, just a slight tweak on your last line there. I think that inside of the group, we actually prioritize by priority and then object ID is what we have in the draft. I'm not sure that makes much difference to
Yes,
but I
you're
thought I
correct.
might mention it because it becomes relevant tomorrow.
I will I will fix the slide and re-upload. Thank you very
No
much.
worry.
No, you're right. I got that wrong.
Mosinati, on the metadata, I think there's a very compelling use case that we've been struggling with in the low overhead container draft. And that's whether to put things into payload headers or whether to migrate them up to the actual object header. And the biggest decision point there is whether or not we ever think a relay may need to operate on that data. And it's a double-edged sword because there's going to be some people in the community that don't want to expose any information, don't want to make it visible to relays. And there's going to be people that say, well, this is essential for high performance, routing and decision-making in a relay. So I think for the LOC draft, it would be very useful if we did start considering some sort of extensibility mechanism for the object header to allow metadata from the other drafts to poke in there.
Yep. Thank you.
I just wanted, there's a note that the note takers, that HedgeDoc may be down right now. And so if somebody can create a public Google Doc quick, so we don't lose notes until HedgeDoc comes back up, and just paste that in the chat so someone can, we have a place to go. There we go. Watson's got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Wood.
All right, next up will be Will, who is joining us remotely. I find his slides. There we go. All yours, Will.
Thank you very much. Just brief audio test before I launch into the ether. Can you hear me?
Yeah, the audio is not wonderful, but I'm not sure if that's your end or ours.
Well,
Your mic is overly hot, Will.
We had that problem in
Stand.
HTTP also. I don't know if Meet Echo can help us.
what about now? Testing. Overly hot mic.
That's better. Thank you.
Any better? Okay. Thanks for the advice. Okay, if the audio gets problematic, just interrupt chairs and I will try to adjust things here. So as mentioned, we're going to start with two ancillary specs, which is the catalog format and also warp following that. These are a warm up to the actual transport that's coming later, but I think we're going to start seeing the next layer of interop, as Alan suggested, at the catalog layer. This was purely a hypothetical format until a couple of weeks ago, and I see Luke started implementing it, and it's now in QUIC.video, so it's progressed beyond that stage. So it's great that people are using it, and I think the more use we get, the more practical and functional it'll become. Next slide, please. So for the agenda, I've got a lot I'm trying to fit, and I'm going to go quickly through these. I want to update you on all the changes since IETF 119, the PRs that have been merged. Then we've got 2 PRs for discussion and 3 issues for discussion. I didn't want to move those issues to PR because it's not clear what direction we should go, so it'd be good to get some feedback. So that's the agenda for the next 15 minutes. Next slide, please. So yeah, just a reminder, actually since last IETF, we did adopt catalog. So it's located in, it moved from my repo into the ID draft, and we're also on the standards path for this right now. Next slide. So I did merge, we expanded the IANA registry of the catalog fields. I used to have a big broad table. I had to reformat it down to 80 characters, so it's much longer now, but essentially we're putting all of the entries into an IANA table. This will allow for extensibility in the future. We can add them without having to issue a new RFC. I think it's a great move, and there was no contention on that. Next slide. We also added a new field to indicate if Delta updates are to be expected by a client, if it needs to be able to pass them. It's very simple. If Delta is expected, you pass a Boolean true. If it's omitted, then it's false. It's assumed to be false. And this helps people write simpler players that can abandon playback if they know they have to parse Delta updates. Next slide. Here I added a new root object to hold inheritable track fields. It basically takes repeated information and moves it to a header in the catalog. Very interesting. This is going to come up later in another issue where there's a move to actually retract this. But for now, it's been merged, and there's actually arguments as to why we may not want to merge this. So we'll address that shortly. Next slide. PR 64. This is one where I actually want to discuss it. So the current spec defines a fixed table of packaging formats. So we've got a stream of data, a track, and in that track we have objects that carry payloads, and we want to tell the client how these are packaged. And we put an IANA registry in with 2 for CMAF and LOC, which are our 2 most commonly requested packaging formats. However, these are very media specific, right? They don't support gameplay or other data-centric users that will have packaging or formatting even that's got nothing to do with CMAF or LOC. And there's more attributes to how you put stuff into the payload than simply the packaging. So this PR replaces the term packaging with the term format, which includes packaging, but can be broader if the implementation wants it to be. And I'll show some examples on the side. You can make up these strings, and the strings are defined by the application format, the streaming application format if it's a media application, or your game format if it's a gaming application. So I don't believe we need to put these into a table, but that would be an open question to the group. Should these be IANA registered, or can they be at the discretion of the application? My opinion is they can be at the discretion. We already have a header field in the catalog that allows you to dictate a version of your application. And that particular version can define the strings, what's allowed, and what should be in there. Victor, for comment?
I think defining the common thing is useful. But that doesn't mean that you cannot put like your own thing, but it should not conflict with well-defined ones. That's typically what we do. Since those are string identifiers, you have a lot of flexibility in that regard.
Okay, just a quick answer to that though. We consider these much like the version of the application which is defined is much like a namespace for the formats, just like we have a namespace and name. So I might call mine CMAF, you might call your CMAF. We mean entirely different things, but our namespace, the tuple of the namespace in the format then define the meaning. That would be the only counter argument to that. I have no objection with creating an IANA table, it's fine. Lucas.
Yeah, maybe I missed something, but I'm Sorry. Why not use media types? Like if you're going to do something on IANA, there's an entire thing already. Why would we define a new thing?
We have a MIME type, which is a separate selection parameter that's already defined. So MIME type is in a field called selection parameters, and it's there with audio and video and frame rate. It's also this is beyond MIME type, right? Your MIME type, you can still within a given MIME type vary the format or how you package it. So this provides a little bit more flexibility than simply MIME type alone, and MIME type's already included. Suhas?
Two comments. I think packaging was fine name, but I'm okay with the format. On the IANA thing, I think there should be something that should be in the IANA. The things that the applications wants to, they want to experiment with, they don't have to register with IANA. But when I say I'm using lock, it would be nice to specify the draft that defines lock. Not something that's on my GitHub, but that's an RFC. So having something with IANA registry that says lock means go refer to this draft would be useful for interoperability.
Okay, fair point. Victor again.
Yeah, I was going to comment first on application thing. Just because they're different application doesn't mean that like they don't share the same thing. So for instance, there are billions of web apps out there, but a lot of them just have like PNG images, and that's a common. So it's kind of similar to MIME types. The reason I believe we should not reuse MIME types is because MIME types are defined for things that look like files, that is, they're like solid sequences of bytes, whereas MOQ is for things that's structured like MOQ tracks. They have groups and objects and those kind of bindings. So you cannot map a MIME type to an MOQ track because they're just structured differently. So that's why I think we should generally avoid referencing those.
Thank you, Victor. Colin.
Colin Jones. Look, I'm sorry to be raising that. This is sort of the nit on the format or something. So on your slide, you have codec : opus in the selecting parameters. What do you call that?
What do we call opus or codec or selection?
What do you call that field, that type field that's there? Because the problem is RTP calls that a format, and you're using the INAF format registry for that value. So there's certainly possibility. I mean, you're going to have, I think this term might introduce real possibility for confusion. Maybe you want to use MOQ format or something instead of format, because like on that same JSON structure, you have another thing that's called format.
Okay, could we use track format? Would that simplify it for you? Because it's actually described as track format, and then it's just the string is format, but when you read the PR, it says this is the track format.
Look, I'm just flagging the issue. I don't really care how you resolve it, including not resolving it at all. But it does seem like a potential for some confusion. There you are.
Okay, I like that suggestion. Thank you, Bernard.
Yeah, to Colin's point, I think this may be the codec string, what we call in web codecs the codec string, which wouldn't be just AV01, right? It would be the full codec string, indicating the profile, tier, and level, and stuff like that. That's
yeah.
just...
The little dots per ellipses mean I truncated it to make it fit on the slide, but it's meant to be the full codec string, same as we use for MSE, for example.
Mosinati, this is an area of a lot of confusion. People that were implementing log, first question to me was, how do I know what codec it is? And I'm like, well, look, doesn't specify the codec, that's in the catalog. And I said, well, how do I map the catalog, codec to something? The reason why I don't think MIME types are appropriate is because these aren't really MIME types. These are probably things that are never going to be specified by the IETF. These are most likely to be specified by other streaming bodies, and there's not a need for an IANA registry to duplicate all of those strings. Web Codex actually does try to enumerate inside of itself within W3C some subsets that they think are relevant, but I don't think that we need to duplicate that in any IANA registry. We just need to be explicit about what are we referencing? If we're referencing some other normative specs, we need to say what they are. Right now, that word codec is not the codec string from any body. That's just the word codec as another tag in the catalog spec, right? Well, it doesn't actually reference the codec string in a body.
Yeah, it's in the catalog spec, it's a generic field where you can put information related to codec. In a streaming draft such as Warp, it's very explicit about what value you put in for codec. And it references the external spec that defines the string that you're going to put in there. So my idea is that the catalog is generic enough that it can suit a whole lot of applications. And it's those applications that make the specific references as to the values that go inside these fields.
Yeah.
If we don't do that, we end up with a... Yeah.
I think this is maybe worthy of having the relevant people form a little mini design team or meeting about all of the things related to packaging, to formats, and descriptions of them. I think need to be fleshed out and agreed between the different streaming formats and the catalog itself. So I think it's probably good to have a little design team for that, because it's not clear at this point, especially implementers trying to implement it have come back with a lot of questions about it.
I'm going to close the queue soon, so come in if you want to get in.
So, yes, I think I have to agree with saying don't use media types for the format. That's probably because you have both the container kind of aspect here, I think, just in certain cases, as well as saying the application of media types. Yeah, RTP has had its problems over the year. I would actually suggest that you define this as a URN, and then you can define an IETF prefix, URN prefix for standardized formats, that if you have such, and then anyone can ensure that they can create the unique ones themselves if there's external formats.
Okay, thank you, Magnus. Okay, I'd like to move. We got a lot more material here. I heard arguments for and against Diana, and I heard the suggestion that we establish a design group for this. I think that's a good suggestion. There's been good comments raised, and that's what I'll do after this meeting. Next slide, please. Right, PR63, adding a type attribute for tracks. Hopefully this is less contentious. So there are a number of use cases where it's very useful to be able to specify the type of a track. For example, to declare it to be a data channel or a timeline track. This is, again, within the scope of the streaming application or the game application that is using the catalog to describe its MOQ content. The idea here is that type is a string, the field is optional. Any application using catalog will need to define the allowed contents of the string. And I showed some examples here on the right. And then the question is, do we want to set, firstly, do we want this? And secondly, do we want to set a max length just to prevent abuse and help people parsing this?
Important question. Are those types always application specific?
Yes. Yes, they're defined by an application. So it can be Victor's special type for Victor's special application. And it has meaning within that.
I think this is actually really easy to solve. You don't need to define this. All you need to do is let applications put any fields they want, because that just makes sense, and we can do that. And then application can put type field, or if it doesn't want type, it can have like 2 types, or it can make type an array if that's what it needs, or whatever. But like, as long as you let applications to add their fields, there is no need for like standard field name type.
So just so I can repeat it back, you're saying that the catalog should be extensible by the application. We define a base catalog, but then the application is allowed to add JSON compliant fields at any point, and it's up to the client, which is understanding that application, to know how to parse and use the information in those fields, and that clients that don't understand that should ignore those fields. Is that correct?
Yes, and I kind of assume that you can just put them already. So.
Okay, thank you. Luke.
Yeah, sorry if you can hear anything in the background, but yeah, my use case for this is just type safety, like implementing, parsing the catalog, and we have like a a video track and audio track. Right now, any track can have any field, like an audio track could have a width. And it just makes it harder to actually implement if everything's optional and everything's undefined. So I would like, I understand what Victor's, saying is like catalog should be generic, but I guess within the streaming format or something, like we should define like what does it mean to be an audio track or to be a video track? Like you must have a sample rate or something like that. Instead of just leaving it to be a big blob of JSON nothingness that we just barf every time there's a weird field in there. Same for selection params as well, Victor. I would like to standardize like codec string will exist. Something, like so I know that not everything is undefined.
But Luke, should they be defined in the application specification or in the catalog specification?
I mean, if you want interrupts, somebody has to define it somewhere. I think if we just treat this like an opaque JSON blob, then interrupt's impossible.
Right, but we're going to interrupt around warp, say. We're not going to interrupt necessarily around catalog format. Or maybe that's a statement and not a question. But if we interrupt around a streaming format, then that streaming format defines all these fields, what should be there, and then you write your parser against that. You don't write it against the generic catalog.
I'm going to close the queue soon, so get up if you want in.
Mosinati, just like we talked about extensibility for the object header in the data plane, I think there'll likely also be extensibility needed for the catalog. My only suggestion, and I agree with Victor that there'll probably be some apps that want to stick their own JSON blobs in this. My suggestion would be let's make it very clear that the different namespaces. So if we have like an X dash prefix or something like that for the application, custom extensions, I'd like to not mix the IETF standard specification fields with, some vendor fields. So I like different namespaces for those if possible.
Good point. Okay, let's move on. And please, these are PRs, so feel free to add comments to the issues, and we'll try to follow up based on the notes. Issue 46. Add a new field to allow suggested relative track prioritization. We actually need this based upon what's been merged around priority. We had no means for a producer to suggest to the client what the relative track priority should be. So it's a simple numerical value. Lower numbers equal higher priority. Catalog should indicate it. If they supply it for any track, then they should indicate it for all tracks. Otherwise, you leave the client in an ambiguous state. You can apply equal priority if you so choose. The absence of relative priority field should be interpreted by the client that all tracks have equal priority. Suhas.
I think this field is important, but I would say it must be provided. If not, what's the default priority is not known. If two applications who's trying to interrupt try to pick the same thing for two different values for the same tracks, it might not work. So I would basically say have the priority. If it's provided, it's good. If not, it's an error.
Okay, I thought that the default priority could be that they're all equal. Is that not an acceptable default state?
Right, like we don't know what's the value of that one, right?
But the value is relative, so it doesn't matter. You're going to make it all 1 or all 4 or all 8 because they're just relative to one another within your connection and your subscription. So if you apply the same number for all of them, the absolute value of that priority doesn't matter.
Okay, I'm just trying to see if I send a subscribe for one of those tracks, what value should I put in there? They're all same, I know, but what value should I put in there? Should it matter or should it not matter? That's
if it's absent,
yeah,
then I think your streaming format should suggest to you that, hey, put a value of 5 or 1 or 3 or pick your number.
Okay, I think in that case, we should add that some note there. If it's missing, an application streaming format might define something. If not, like when I send a subscribe, I have no idea what to say because we use catalog or something. The catalog will parse the catalog and tell my MOQ layer saying subscribe with this priority for a given track. the application
Okay.
can pick a default priority if it's not there, but one way or the other way, we need to make that clear.
I agree with you. Thank you. Okay, next slide. So this came in pretty quickly. I mentioned we added a PR to add common track field. The idea was to compress the catalog size by removing or referencing repeated information running once. Luke made the comment that it complicates his parser, that if we really want to make catalog smaller, we should just shift to binary and away from JSON, which is a fair comment. And the request there is remove common track fields and simply repeat the elements. So on the left-hand side, you see a simple implementation with only 2 tracks. And on the right, you see the information repeated. Obviously, the compression, if you had 10 tracks or 1,000 tracks, would be a lot better. But I buy the argument that if we're in the JSON realm, we're not too worried about the size here. So I'm actually in favor of this, and I'm willing to make a PR to remove it, as long as there's some additional support for this.
James. Yeah, I mean, I just think that this is the stuff, like, until we see that we need this, this is just sort of like, let's optimize this later, not now. So I'm sort of in favor of remove.
By the way, mic 1 camera for the online audience is now super blurry. It's like a single pixel. Okay, so no objections. Watson, who just spoke? That was Colin. Based on voice, because oh, it got clear now. Right, next slide, please. Streaming format should be a string and not an integer. So this was common from Jonathan and Scott. Currently, so if you look at example number 1, a streaming format is an integer defined in an IANA table. And we've got, notice we've got 3 fields. We've got the version of the catalog, we've got the streaming format identifier, and then we've got the streaming format version. The proposal is to convert it to a string, which is fine, and then to limit it to ASCII characters. So, which is version 2. I would prefer to keep it UTF-8 to support non-Western character sets, but otherwise going to a string I think is good. Proposal 3 is, if while we're doing this, we can coalesce streaming format and streaming version into one, right? Make a string that's got a number in it. It's a contract between the application and the publisher and the player, so you can put both version and format in there, and that's example 3. And then proposal 4 is actually remove the catalog version field, because again, that streaming format as defined there is going to tell you what catalog version you need to use. So we don't need to repeat that information. So the suggestion is to move to sample 4 here, but the proposal is as was shown and probably is number 2. Any comments?
Stuart Cheshire from Apple. I was trying to log in the queue, but something was going wrong. I would strongly argue against option 4 because this is not user interface. This is a protocol identifier, and numbers have the property that somebody has to allocate them, so you don't have a collision. Strings are a bit more wasteful with space, but they can be mnemonic, they can be convenient. But as long as they are opaque protocol identifiers, they're machine-to-machine communication. Engineers may look at them, but normal end users never do. Supporting UTF-8 and all the arbitrary scripts comes with a whole bunch of problems, and it's not worth it. A similar example from my experiences with DNS service discovery service types. They are US ASCII strings, letters and digits, cases insignificant. They're expressive enough that they're usefully mnemonic, but they don't have to be unlimited length, and they don't have to be unlimited character set. So I think that's a mistake. I fully support UTF-8 in user interfaces, but not for on-the-wire protocols.
Great, thank you. You make a good point, and that was a vote for, I think, 2 with the constraint to ASCII. Colin.
I was going to go the same direction of like the UTF-8 will just have bugs, interoperability bugs, subtle interoperability bugs forever, because people won't test it with the hard cases. So I would not want to do that. And I mean, as a general thumb, anything that can be separated into semantically different things, I'd prefer them see them separated in semantically different fields. It just seems easier to reason about. You know, you can ask if things are greater than or equal. And I'm thinking about the cases where you're supporting more than one version at a time and you're trying to migrate from an old version to a new version. Those are the cases that I think may be easier. I don't have a strong opinion, but I want to think about those very carefully. I don't see the reason to embed the version into the string. Like it just,
Okay.
you know, if you can separate, maybe you should. So.
Thank you. Mo?
Mosinati, I specifically don't want to merge the catalog version with the streaming format version. I think it's semantically incorrect, and you want to be able to parse the catalog by knowing what version it is, but the streaming format version may be different, and it wouldn't affect your ability to parse the catalog. So I don't think we should ever mix the catalog version with the streaming format version.
Okay. So I heard pretty strong consensus for option 2 here, keeping the values separate and then having some type of ASCII restriction on the contents of streaming format, but it will be a string. If we can add that to the notes. Next slide, please.
That's the last
Well, that should be
slide.
the end of the deck. Yeah, I realize I got warnings about out of time, but we still have a warp to go to. Can I get a few minutes for that?
You can have 4 minutes.
Thank you.
Do I have that slide deck?
It has been uploaded, yep. Or maybe you have to approve it. It was uploaded about 6 hours ago. If you don't want to burn time, we can go to someone whose slides you've got, and then I will just message you that directly.
Will, would you mind just bumping to Thursday? We have a little more space there for that discussion.
Yeah, that's fine by me.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up will be Colin talking about secure objects.
I'm standing in the white box, not the pink box. Okay, so this is really about sort of our end-to-end encryption of how we encrypt this data. And if you want to logically think about this, I'm talking about the equivalent in the RT, you know, this is to SRTP and RTP, you know, this is sort of the SRTP equivalent or a proposal for that here. So next slide, let me talk about this a little bit. So this is what I want to get out of this today is not the details of whether this draft's the right way to do it or something else. This is basically S-frame, this draft, but I want to get of like, you know, whether people are willing to move forward with something along these lines or not. So first of all, I want to make sure it's very clear what this is not. This is not common encryption or CMAF or anything like that. Like this is not trying to replace those or get rid of those. For the people who are, you know, trying to do those types of things, they'd keep doing exactly what they're doing in the first place. They'd never use this. But for a lot of cases where we are trying to do more video conferencing type applications or some of the other applications, many of these might be using lock, in fact, they have some need for a more end-to-end encryption of our objects. And the reason why is this stuff flows through a lot of relays. We want to be able to use a lot of different relays, and all the relays have access to the unencrypted objects, okay? You know, we don't want to have them looking into them or anything, but it does flow through them. So there's a goal to how do we encrypt this end to end? Now, the other thing that we want to do, and this is the same as SRTP. I mean, you could ask, like, why don't we just take RTP packets and encrypt them with S-MINE and then send them across? And the reason why is They would get a lot larger with S-MINE than they would if you use something like SRTP. And this is a similar proposal here. It's an argument that the existing mechanisms that we have floating around expand things enough that for small objects, particularly audio objects and things like this, we probably want to do something a little specialized that keeps our bandwidth down. So the keying, this is just a symmetric keying mechanism, or just a symmetric encryption. The keying and those types of things is a separate issue. I'm not talking about that in this draft at all. That would be, you know, you'd use MLS or something else to set up your keys. But once you have the keys, this is how you do your data. Very similar model to SRTP again. So next slide. You know, the key thing that we're dealing with here is one way or another, and how this is done is use an AEAD encryption mechanism, but use our existing information about the full track name and the object IDs and things to help not have duplicate counters in there, and use those to generate the counters so that we don't expand our bandwidth usage substantially. And that's roughly what SRTP does. Okay, and we could talk a little bit about how these are formed and make sure they're secure and stuff. Obviously, that would happen, but I just want to get to the big things. So, go to the next slide for a second. I don't think I really want to talk. I mean, I just want to mention that when we talk about low bandwidth, I mean, audio codecs are dropping fast in how low a rate they're going at, and this becomes particularly relevant for like satellite links and some of these other low latency links, long radio links, LoRa, free links, these types of things. So back a slide, and with that, let me open it up for questions here.
Madam Apple, I'm not sure why not adopting S-frame, because S-frame was implemented just for these use cases.
So go to the last slide on this deck. Okay, so Richard, who's standing beside you, will no doubt comment on this too, which is, you know, doing S-frame. So algorithmically, this is the same as S-frame, but we need to define somewhere, like go back 2 more slides. So this is basically, oh no, this is fine. Sorry, I'll go that slide, I'll stop moving around. Okay, we need to have something that says how you take a group ID and an object and you put them into S-frame or deal with those types of things, okay? Like the S-frame does not know what a group ID or an object ID is. We have to have something to wrap up in there. So as I said, this is based on S-frame. And I'm totally open to how we do that and whatever. That's not what I'm trying to get to here. And if somebody wants to propose something completely different than S-frame, like we should go use something else, sure, fine. But I'm more trying to get, do we do this concept and do we move this forward, S-frame or not?
If it's just header, we just add a header extension to S-frame. I don't want to like go through the same conversation we had in S-frame again, right?
Yeah. So the short answer is that semantically, like this is like you can do this with S-frame. You want to end up computing the S-frame key ID and counter based on some of the stuff that's already present in the MOQ headers. So I've got a PR on Cullen's doc to basically replace the crypto innards with S-frame, so that there's no invention here. So your intuition exactly right. This is S-frame, but there's a little bit of compression you want to do so that you can leverage stuff that you're already transmitting as part of the MOQ headers.
And I wrote this draft by copying S-frame. So, okay, but I mean, like the only question that's floating around is by value or reference. Okay, but that's irrelevant towards the overall concept here. So I mean, I'd just like to get some feedback. You know, do people see this useful? Can we move forward with something like this or not? Oh,
Victor.
Oh, sorry.
I'm not sure where I would use it, but this is definitely seems like highly useful. I'm not sure whether we need KID or in every object, or we can put it in the catalog, because it sounds like we could make the same thing as simple and as minimalistic as possible. And the only question that's hard is, do we truncate the off tag or not?
Yes, the off tags. And look, this is definitely, I imagine this being optional in the sense that the catalog tells you whether you're using this or not. And certainly lots of people would never use it, including probably every CMath use case.
Did you want to answer Victor first? Richard?
So the short answer, Victor, you can't just use the track ID as the key ID, because you will want to, in a situation where like with MLS, where you might be having different sets of receivers over time, you probably want to use different keys over time to encrypt the same track.
Mosinati. So I took this as an instantiation of S-frame in the MOQ context, because there are key context fields that you need for every indent encryption scheme like SRTP and everything else. And so this defines what those key context things are. Where the key comes from, how's the key derived, where the nonces come from, how are they derived, and so this binds them directly to the MOQ object model and on the wire fields. So this to me makes perfect sense as an instantiation of S-frame. So I don't see it as competitive at all. On the way that it's laid out, this is something I struggle with also in the low overhead container, and I think, just like we said, that MOQ may need some extensibility for the header, object header fields. I'm wondering whether we actually need a trailer, an object trailer as well. Just like HTTP and other protocols, you often have header, body, trailer, and encryption is a typical example where you have exactly that, header, body, trailer. You always want these auth tags as trailers. So I'm wondering if we need to explicitly have these trailers instead of burying everything inside of opaque blobs of payload headers and payload trailers. Should we actually just expose what the headers and trailers are in the protocol?
I mean, our experience in RTP would certainly suggest we did it the wrong way there, and that we should deliberately expose it. Yeah. So
I'm going to close the queue very soon. Suhas, please be brief.
Yeah. Suhas, Cisco, I think to the meta question that Colin, you're asking, should we do something symmetric object encryption that does not work for a real-time conferences like WebEx? I think we need to do something on those lines. How will we use S-frame? I think that's once we adopt this one, we can figure that one out.
okay, thank you.
Colin, can I ask what you're, are you asking for the working group to adopt this work? You want to iterate some more as an ID? What is your plan or vision here?
I mean, what I'd really like to do is ask the working group to adopt it. But I think that there's probably some people that would like to see the details of how this is connected with S-frame resolved before that happens. And I'm certainly willing to go work on a revision of the draft that particularly addresses that issue. I hadn't thought at all about what Mo suggested, but I think that's a very positive idea that we go and figure out how to deal with that. And that's about general extensibility of MOQ. So it might be figure out both of those issues and then see if we're at the point where we're ready to adopt.
Okay. Mo, maybe I'll ask if you can file an MOQT issue if you want to, so we can have a discussion there about whether we need trailers in the transport. And then it sounds like we'll look for an update of the draft and discuss in upcoming meetings going forward.
Thanks.
Right, thank you for bringing the work.
Last up, we have Victor to talk about his experience trying to implement Subscribe v2.
Yeah, so I'm Victor. So Subscribe v2 is the one that's in draft 05, and the subscribe format itself is an improvement over what was previously there, but there are lots of issues with how it's defined, and specifically the cases that are underdefined. And I'm going to talk about some of those. So next slide. So currently, Subscribe has 4 modes of things that you can subscribe. You can subscribe to current group, which is all objects starting with object 0 of the current group, to current object, absolute start to infinite, and absolute start with absolute end, which is you specify the exact range of objects you're subscribing to. So the easiest to understand and the ones that I think we kind of got correctly is the current object, because the way you do it is you look at your track, you figure out what largest delivered object is, either because you're the original publisher or because you subscribed and the original publisher told you what the largest delivered object is because it's a field in subscribe. Okay. Then you either do or do not send current object. It is unclear for me from the spec whether subscribing the current object implies actually sending the current object or the object after it. And then like you just forward all of the new objects that are after that object. So the next slide is the difficulty comes in when there are ranges, especially ranges of objects in the past. So right now it is possible to send subscribe to something like group 1000 to group 2000 and assume we have stream per group and assume that the track itself is like already far past group 2000, but the original publisher actually has all of those 1000 groups. And it is not clear what's supposed to happen. So if you're subscribed to the live objects will arrive to you basically as long as the rate at which those objects are generated can be sustained by all links in the path between you and the original publisher. And if it cannot be sustained, it already doesn't work, so that's fine. Now, the problem with subscribing to a bunch of existing stuff is that if there are 1000 objects, the most naive thing you can do is you can send all 1000 of them at once, and that would be really bad because even not just it's unclear whether the link supports it. What will happen is you're blocked by quick flow control. So you will be able to send like 100 streams at best. And then you have 900 streams that are queued and they're taking up bandwidth and space from possibly more important real-time data that actually even priorities don't fully solve it because priorities don't quite solve it. So that is like really naive solution of what you could do, and doing that is really bad. Ian, do you want me to finish the slide, or do you want to speak now?
I was just going to clarify on this particular slide. I think with the group order, if you follow the algorithm, you would need to be able to send all the data on group like 1000, then all the data on group 1001, 1002, and so on and so forth. So I agree this is possible, but I mean, you'd have to have a huge congestion window unless these groups are enormously small. I'm not saying the problem in general, like I think the shape of the problem you're spelling out is true, but I think the example is a little bit
there is nothing in the
unrealistic.
text that doesn't say that you cannot open a stream for 1001 if you have 1000 open.
Well, it says to write it first.
Yes,
so you
but
have to.
you
I
can
don't know.
open
At
stream
least that's
and
what I
not-
intended to write when I wrote the text. I guess if you're doing what you're doing here, unless you have enough congestion window for all 1000 streams and their payloads, I think you're doing it wrong. Is my personal opinion. Or based on what I tried to write, you're doing it wrong. I don't know.
So I'm
Anyway.
gonna jump since Victor didn't have an immediate answer. I just noticed we've got a couple of people in the queue, and please remember, maybe we should try to keep the questions to clarifying questions so that Victor can get through all of his slides in the remaining 17 minutes.
Yeah,
So please
actually, we
keep-
have like a space for clarifying questions, like in a couple of slides.
Okay. Mo and Suhas, do you want to keep it brief, or Victor, would you prefer to just run through everything and then take questions toward the end?
Okay, you can go, Victor.
Okay, so one thing, so the problem here is that not only it's unclear whether you can open those streams, but also you have to somehow fetch those from the backend. And when you're fetching from the backend, the problem is if your backend is in the cloud and very fast, that means that the backend will be able to send those streams to you faster than you can receive them. So now you have to do something clever about that. And there are some solutions I tried, like I tried the things that Ian mentioned, where you only write stream 1000 and do not open stream 1001 until you are done with stream 1000, but even that is complicated because that means like you have to manage how you fetch all of those streams for backend, and you really want to prefetch some of those in advance, and it all becomes a huge mess, and it would be much easier if we could solve it on a quick layer. Next slide. So there is a bit of a related issue, so where I'm not sure how to explain it, but this happens when you try to subscribe to current group, is that if you subscribe to current group and like right now, you say your current group is at stream one, is like at object 1000, what could happen is you're a relay and you're like, well, I am supposed to send object 0 to however big this current group is. I don't know, it's not finished. So I probably evicted like some of those beginning objects from cache. So now, since the subscribe, I have to subscribe to LifeHead, but I also have to try to backfill. And the problem is that as I backfill, the head can move further and further. And that means for that single subscribe to current group, even though it sounds simple, like in subscribing to current group, but I have to do this like fetch loop of fetching more objects from backend in case they get evicted faster than I can send them. So next slide. And the third problem I have with subscribe is that it's like the semantics of what happens on objects that do not exist are not clear. So for instance, if for group 1000 I request objects 100 to 9100, and this group never had more than 10 objects, do I send nothing? Do I send 9,000 objects that say object do not exist, or what happens? The second one is that if there is a bit of ambiguity between objects that will never exist and objects that do not exist yet but might be missing. And if I'm doing stream per object mapping and I receive every odd object from the upstream, that means I'm missing like 500 objects, and I have to have this really large data structure to track those. Whereas ideally what I would do is for objects in the past, I would ask fetch, and fetch would tell me for every object definite status. Next slide. So this is so those are the three big issues, and I want to hear what people think, whether those make sense or how do people deal with those.
Mozinati, thank you very much, Victor. This implementation experience exactly matches my thought experiment of why the subscribe is doomed whenever we have anything other than what MOQ was intended for, the live edge. So let me briefly explain what I mean. The live edge is coming at media rate. The live edge is coming as the media is being produced. So that means it is not VOD. You would never ever do this VOD. If you're doing VOD, those are fetches. Those are not subscriptions. Those are fetches. So I think preserving subscribe only for the MOQ live edge use case removes these problems that Victor has. And furthermore, when you do a fetch, more like an H3 get or something, there's an assumption that we're delivering all of that at line rate and fully in parallel. If you did fetch 10 fetches, you'll get 10 parallel fetches. That is most likely not what the application wants. And then you're going to have some extension to MOQ to say, okay, deliver at media rate or something like that. And I think separating that from subscribe, it makes a lot more sense, because I think there's different machinery for fetch. It impacts the priorities. It impacts the delivery rate. It impacts the congestion control between the catch-up streams and the live streams. It impacts the availability of the objects in the cache. And what decision points does the relay make? Do I go back and get something or not? So I think limiting subscribe to only live edge, not even current group, not even saying go back to the beginning of the current group. No, the current object is all you can subscribe to, or this beginning of the next stream. I think that would obviate these problems.
So Cisco, thanks, Victor. I think this took me back to Denver interim, because this were the exact same problems why Will, myself, and you and others, we started talking about fetch versus subscribe, and there's very clear semantics and rich semantics for fetch. Like as Mo was pointing out, you can basically control the order you want it to be delivered, how you want to be delivered, and those kind of semantics does not apply to subscribe when for live data. So anything that has absolute range or something in the past very well fits with the fetch semantics, and we can define what kind of behavior we want there. But overloading that same thing with subscribe is the exact same problems we are reiterating after implementation experience that proves that we have to solve this problem. Thank you.
Okay, Cullen, and maybe keep it brief because Victor has some more slides.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So I'm of the thought pattern that the best way to deal with this is for things in the past. They should come for each time you request things in the past, you get one stream and all of the data comes over that for exactly what you requested. And that it's prioritized in a way that makes sense relative to the stuff in the future, and that we handle past and future fairly separately. I don't care whether the method is called subscribe or foobar, but that the text of how we handle things in the past and how we handle things in the future are impossible to be the same.
Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, I was just gonna say for the fetch suggestions, fetch has to be pretty radically different, like what Cullen's proposing. Otherwise, it's very similar to subscribe. You run into the same flow control issues if you try to request more objects than flow control allows. You have the same cache problems, like the cache being empty. So I do think that there's a world where we can make this easier, but I don't think just magically saying like we only support old objects is gonna fix it. It's a little harder than that.
Okay, thanks. Martin Duke, practicing for the Olympics.
Martin Duke is an individual. So Victor, on your slide about requesting 10 to up to object 1,000 and the right edge goes to 1,500, current group will just give you the whole group, right? Or is the point that you want to stop after the group?
Well,
like
current group will give you the whole group. The problem is like current group might be very long, and if you're backfilling, you might have to like continuously backfill it from backend. Because if it's very long.
But the relay can just subscribe to the current group, so we'll just keep getting stuff. It doesn't have to issue new subscribes.
Yes, but okay, if you're like have 5 clients and they're all up to date on object 1000 of current group, and then a new client subscribes and says, please give me current group since object 0. Now it's possible that those object 0 to 1000s are like out of any cache on your relay because
okay, thanks.
Them, so.
Okay, so that strains the queue. So go ahead and.
Okay, so the next slide is I'm trying to like go through the proposals, and I'm mostly going to focus on what I think is like, let's start with solving the live case. And in live case, what we usually do is we want to subscribe to new objects. And sometimes we want to get some objects in past, but usually not that much. Sorry, not that many of those objects. And next slide. So our previous proposal was roughly the ones that I think I was advocating for in Denver. Was that, well, we do subscribe and then we do fetch, and then you do a thing called atomic subscribe and fetch, where subscribe kind of decays in the subscribes that just delivers you new things, and then fetch that delivers you old things, and that kind of both of those are well defined and this works. That's kind of used to be work in theory. However, this has 2 drawbacks that were pointed out even back then. So next slide. The big drawback is that since in some delivery preferences, objects can be reordered, you might have stuff that's like below the live head, and that falls into fetch, and that has weird semantics. And then you can have stuff and that means that like you're not really fully solving the problem. And there is also an observation that this kind of has weird property where your current group is always delivered on 2 streams. One is like past the head at the moment of subscription, and one is in the future. Next slide. So to fix this, I three simple things. One is, so before we define subscribe as delivering new things, and by new things we mean things with increasing object numbers. And my proposal is to redefine that to just means that subscribe means that publisher, for original publisher, it's the objects that are newly generated, and for the relay, it's the objects that are received from a subscribe from publisher. And the reason this is good is it solves two issues. One issue is where you can write a group before it while the new group is open, and the second is also a reordering issue. Next slide. So the second component is to define fetch, and I'm not even going to delve into what fetch is supposed to mean, but we defined it. So it's like you specify a well-defined range of what happens. And next slide is my actual proposal that I think I kind of solves what we were trying to do before. And it's kind of a practical solution for doing backfill of like couple of past groups without making it too complex. So usually when you subscribe to upstream, you will have some buffer of like and most recent groups because you're fanning out those groups to a bunch of clients, and not all of those clients have stable connections, so you have to buffer them. So you have to cache a bunch of recent groups anyways. For live application, my idea is that you can ask the relay, please send me and most recent groups, and the relay can look at that cache, and if they're in cache, it will give them to you. And if they're not in cache, it will not give them to you. And my observation is that this is roughly works most of the time. And my second observation is this is really easy to implement. This does not have any edge cases since all of your objects are in RAM and none of them are stuff that you have to go back to the origin to do. And that's why I like it. And I kind of have code, like I looked at the way our code works, and that would, yeah.
Victor, wrap it up. Last slide, and we'll get some brief comments.
Yeah, this is roughly like what I propose. Is like we resurrect fetch and replace absolute ranges with like subscribe to and most recent groups.
Lovely. Thank you, Victor. We have 3 minutes, so I would like to invite people to come to the mic to comment with a focus of would you like to see PR in this general direction? And let's not bike shed the details. Just like, do you want to go see PR? Is this like completely the wrong way to go?
So Cisco, I would definitely like to see PR and also help writing some of the PRs.
Thank you, Suhas. Luke?
I said in the chat, but I'll just say it again. Backfill, Victor's proposal is based on the cache. That means it changes based on which relay you connect to. Like 2 different users could get different backfill results just on a whim. Really should treat the cache as transparent. Like the relay needs to, almost to the user, the cache doesn't exist. So I really don't like that behavior being specified.
Okay, so you would not like to see PR along these lines?
I mean, I like to think it rethought. Like, I don't want a verb that says serve only what's in cache, because that's making cache part of the protocol.
Okay, thanks.
Oh. Why am I not in the queue? Go ahead. Go for it. Mosinati, I support something along these lines, not specifically these lines. I think we do need to revisit the fetch versus subscribe. I don't specifically want the cacheability aspect mentioned, or the most recent groups and groups, nothing in the past for subscribe.
Thank you.
I mean, I agree with what
Will's next.
I'm really sorry, Will.
No, it's okay, Colin. Why don't you finish and I'll go right after you.
TikTok. Somebody go.
Okay, I'm going. I just also want to support the notion that the caches are immaterial. As a cache implementer, it's a delivery optimization. It should not affect what is received or what is requested. So I would also not want a API that somehow gives you different results based on what's the cache. The cache may not be there, and it doesn't matter.
See you next. Look, all I was going to say is I think this is the most promising direction we've seen. I'd really love to see this work continue. I do agree with like Luke's comments on the cache.
Ian?
Yeah, I tend to agree that this is potentially encouraging. I think the observation that absolute start offsets with subscribe are sort of not dangerous, but problematic is a correct one. I will say from like writing the like fetch subscribe PR before, if you actually create a whole new message with like all of its accoutrements, it ends up being kind of a huge pain and a wall of text. It might actually be easier just to add a mode to subscribe or make the current absolute start end mode in subscribe and just say that is this verb or something, or that's the fetch verb or something. It makes for a much smaller diff. And you basically need you need priority for fetch. You need like basically all the stuff in there, I think. So just
Okay.
from an editorial perspective.
Does anyone want, in the 10 seconds we have, does anyone want to speak against fetch? I hear a lot of pushback on backfill. Okay, so Victor, I think you have marching instructions if you're willing to submit a PR. Some sort of subscribe fetch that with no backfill. I mean, there's a pretty strong signal, I think, from the room. If you want to argue about backfill on side conversations, that's great. But at the moment, I think that's where the group is. Sound good to you, Victor? Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone for attending. It is 5 o'clock. We will see you tomorrow for round 2. And thanks to our scribes. You will get chocolate tomorrow, at least one of you. Oh, can you deliver to Watson? Okay, we have that recorded, so don't like claim you didn't get it. All right, well, Alan will have it tomorrow. He didn't bring it today.
The live stream.